So welcome, Timo, to 600 Seconds in HRTech. It's good to see you.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. So this is a new format for us, as I think you know, but for those of you who are wanting to follow along on the journey, we actually did a movable feast conversation back in May at Unleash. And so what we're using today's opportunity is to dig in a little bit deeper onto some of the things that are happening at Ingentis. So when we did that conversation back in May, you talked to us about how Ingentis helps customers transform fragmented organizational data into a trusted foundation, which we all know is essential for leveraging AI. Can you give us some details on how you're doing that, where you see companies struggle the most in the process, and what helps them become successful?
Business is done between people still, at least today. And so from understanding even what we do with AI does not start with algorithms, right? It starts with trust. And so we really want to be there and partner with companies or help companies create that trust to connect the fragmented organizational data, and then of course visualize it and identify the gaps, and then actually turning that into like a foundation that leaders, managers, executives can use for decision making. So once that foundation exists, AI, workforce planning, succession planning, organizational design, it becomes a lot more powerful, right? And so because you're working with the same organization and truth versus fragmented data sets and guesswork, so to speak. Of course, everybody is still concerned about what source of truth is there, in what role is there with AI, and who owns AI. And as we navigate through this, and as we work with different clients that are, I guess, on different paths or journeys and different evolutionary stages of all of that, we see a lot of critical components. But the overarching theme is that, the goal is not perfect data. The goal is decision-grade data. And that's like one of those themes that we address heavy on, that the data is clean enough, it's governed enough, it's transparent enough to then support meaningful business decisions and not perfect. I hope that makes sense. Now, of course, we are still a German company, so our bar is very high when it comes to that stuff. But I also believe that, humans, we make decisions based on the data we have. Computers, of course, do it similar, and there will always be a human component that then takes some of the validation into consideration.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the data themselves, because we actually recently run a study on skills data architecture. And while that is a very specific use case, the way I've been thinking about it is, in some ways, it's probably one of the foremost use cases we see for why we need to bring data together, why we need to integrate and harmonize and orchestrate and govern them, and then what we can then go make decisions off of those data from. So can you talk a little bit about, for Ingentis, what are the types of data that you're bringing together and from what sources? And what does that look like in terms of that semantic layer of getting it ready for people to make those critical decisions?
Yeah, for us, of course, there's the typical use cases that we look into: data from HR, right? Anywhere from master data from finance, data from organizational design units, and even data from COOs. And really understanding, and we've been a data company for, I guess, 29 years now, almost 30 years. And so really understanding what data is relevant to make what decision. Not every data point is relevant for every decision, right? I don't need somebody's date of birth to know, whether they want soup for breakfast. That is mainly relevant. It may be some correlation, but you get the point. People get worked up on, I need more data sets. And we have clients that have 80 something different data sets feeding into our org manager. And that's great, right? We can, of course, work with all of that. But what is the purpose, and what is the why? And even in our sales cycle, in our discovery, we don't want to just push a product or use case, right? But we really want to understand, where are people and where are the leaders, and what structures do they have to really understand? What alternatives can we help them model to status quo? Like, where are the risks that we have to identify, right? And then, of course, we visualize that entire impact. But at the end, right, of course, the foundation has to be trusted data, right? And so across the board, and we address a lot of different use cases. We built ready to roll extensions. I know this is not a sales call. I don't want to sell, but it's those ready to roll extensions that have been based on 30 years of listening to clients with 2,800 clients and some that tell us about a different use case. Like, oh, let us help model that for you, define it for you, and then show you the use case and the problem that it solves. But again, the data comes from anywhere, right? And so it's like everything else, right? You try to take the most and best data to make the wisest decision, given the circumstances and the future goal.
It sounds like there's a fair amount of consultative work that goes into deciding, okay, these are the types of questions we want to answer. Therefore, these are the types of data we want to use. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we don't, and we don't really sell even consulting hours or professional service hours in the extent of where we want to, we're not a consulting firm.
Right.
But our clients work, our professional service employees work with so many clients where it's more a matter of, hey, we've seen this before. And so the reason why I mentioned the discovery, I could say, hey, here's Work Manager, go buy it. This is what it does. But because when we built Work Manager over, like I said, 29 years, it was built to where you can have a big set of Legos. And now, what do you want to build? And I give you 1,000 different manuals, right? The little manuals that when you build Legos, and you can just pick. You want a car, you want a boat, you want a house, you want to build something. And so now instead of saying, hey, what do you want to build? And you're like, I don't know. I was like, well, let's see what you have. And then, oh, you want to go from A to B. Maybe we build you a boat, or we build you a car, or we build you a plane. Where, hey, I need a strong, succession plan to get more into the actual topic and not in Lego analogies. And it's like, okay, there's different components, right? You want to understand succession planning. That means you want to know where you are today, where you want to be in the future, what that workforce looks like, and we have those ready to run extensions in place. But instead of, just pushing a product, that's where we want to learn. The beauty of our product is, like I said, it's so powerful. It's like this big box of Legos or a Swiss Army knife or whatever, right? I mean, MacGyver, he can build anything with a Swiss Army knife. And from that perspective, that's where we are as a company as well. We don't want to overwhelm our clients, but we want to not just push a particular product on them.
So you mentioned succession planning, so I want to spend a little bit of time there. You all have been talking actually a lot about succession planning, and some people might say, why is an org design software company talking about succession planning? So tell me about why you are thinking about this. How does org design play into succession planning, and how are customers using your solution capabilities for that specific use case?
Yeah, and I'm more excited about what I call organizational performance, right? And so organizational performance to me is the data design, the visualization, but also some of the strategic workforce planning and succession planning. So it's really understanding an organization and where the organization finds itself in the evolutionary process, right? Are they a startup? Are they a scale up? Are they divesting? Are they merging? Maybe they're buying a company, maybe layoffs. And so truly understanding the status quo, but then with the strategy in mind for the future. Like, what are the things that I want to look for that I potentially need in 3, 5, 10 years from now? Now, I understand in the age of AI, people don't even look at 5 years anymore, which is fine. But you can still understand that, hey, if you have a workforce, excuse me, that's comprised of 60% of people that are 70, planning 10 years can be challenging, right? When some may retire. Not me, but some may retire. And so
we're all going to be working forever, Timo.
That's right. Well, but I've always said I want to be in charge of my future, and hope is not a strategy. And so the reason why I believe succession planning is important, because you want to make sure that not just you set the company up for success, but the vendors and the clients, right? Because it's a closed cycle where our responsibilities as executives of one organization have to look downstream at the vendors and have to look upstream at the clients. And so to me, why decision making has to be based on a sound succession planning is because of those components, because you don't want to be surprised that all of a sudden half of your workforce retires.
I can think of all sorts of really useful ways that this could be deployed, but I want to make sure kind of it aligns with some of what you're doing. So then would it be possible, for instance, to say, what happens if, 60% of our workforce retires in 3 years? What might that organization then look like? Like, are you able to kind of play it out into the different scenarios?
Let me jump one level deeper and not go as broad. So org design makes succession planning visible. structural and actionable, right? So it moves from a conversation from who's on the list to, well, where are we exposed? Like, what options do we even have? And what would happen if we made a specific move, right? So the data modeling and simulation becomes very powerful because it's the what if scenarios. And that to me is what succession planning is. Not just a matter of like, well, I have 10 employees that are retiring in 3 years. Well, I guess I have to get 10 more. Okay, fine. But like I said, we do a lot more on the modeling, the what if scenarios that can help and how it affects the entire structure, right? Because there's matrix organizations, there's direct hierarchies, and then skill gaps potentially.
And so you can see all of that when you then are modeling out the org structure.
For me, it's not, like I said earlier, it's not so much like who's on the list. It's more like I said, where do we find exposure? What options do we have? Because again, I want to be in charge of my option. And then like the what if happens when we make this move here or that move there, and how it affects, the ripple effect that goes down or up the remainder of the organization.
Let's talk a little bit also about workforce planning and org design, because that naturally fits in with the scenario designs that we were just discussing. So they used to kind of live org design and workforce planning as separate things, but now we're seeing them really begin to converge. So can you share a bit about how you're seeing that happen and what your customers are doing to make the two work together, and if you have any specific examples of that in practice?
For the sake of this, let me at least define it the way I would define it, right? Because you're right, workforce planning and org design, they live with each other, right? In this organizational planning context. So I look at workforce planning that tells us what capabilities and capacities we need. Org design tells you how those capabilities should be structured to create optimal performance. So for me, the future is not one or the other. It's the integrated organizational planning and really understanding. That's why I mentioned earlier this what organizational performance, little approaches like what used to be the old, we need 50 more people. Well, the better approach in this operational model is, well, what operational model do we need? Which capabilities should we have centralized or regionalized? Or which management structures can support this kind of growth, right? Those are the use cases that are a lot more around stepping back and looking at the big picture versus reacting towards a particular need that may be apparent today.
And are you all starting to work with customers on how to do this in the context of AI? Because a lot of what we're hearing is, well, if we have different skills or if some parts of jobs are being taken away, we're going to have to reconfigure our workforce plan, our org design, potentially our succession plan. So what are you seeing?
I don't want to get in trouble with our CTO, right? The Germans are like, let's build the perfect product and at some point talk about it. I'm super excited with what they do because, the organizational decisions that we build in Org Manager that are driven by AI, they touch all of that, right? And so we see AI as a way to help leaders understand structures, model those alternatives that we just talked about, identify the risk, and then, of course, visualize that impact, right? So that's why I said earlier that the foundation is the trusted data. We have to get the data right. Cleansing. It's still a lot of our bread and butter, making sure the data that flows in is cleaned. And then that AI will not replace leadership judgment, but it helps leaders to make that judgment based on informed decision. And that's where our AI supports it inside Org Manager now. This is like all happening like now and very, 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 very soon. So I'm super excited. And I say that with a grin, right? I just, like I said, they build it perfect. And then we talk about it, I feel like in the past. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we don't want to get you any more trouble. So I'm going to say thank you so much for spending 600 seconds with us today. And we'll look forward to having you on another installment. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about all these three things together with some customers. That'd be great.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you, Timo. So that's my conversation with Timo Sandritter of Ingentis. And I want to take a few minutes to share what I took away from it. The first thing I want to highlight is something Timo said early on. The goal is not perfect data. It's decision grade data. That addresses one of the most common challenges I see in HR organizations, which is this endless questioning around data quality that never quite's finished because someone always finds another problem. In a different podcast we did with David Edwards, he talks about how we have data paralysis just because we're trying to get to perfection. But Timo's point here in this podcast is that the bar should be whether the data are clean enough, governed enough, and transparent enough to support a meaningful business decision. And that's a very different standard from perfect. Here at Red Thread, we've done a lot of work on data architecture, including a recent study on skills data architecture. And one of the things we hear constantly is that organizations stall. So decision grade is a more practical and more useful threshold, and I'd encourage any HR team to start using it. The second thing I want to talk about is Timo's framing of succession planning. He said something I found pretty compelling. He says that org design makes succession planning visible, structural, and actionable. The shift he described is from asking who's on the list, which is generally what we see with succession planning, to instead, where are we exposed? And that's really a shift around risk. And that is something that business leaders care about. They don't necessarily care about who's on the list. They care about that risk. This is a genuinely different question, though, and it requires different types of tools to answer. What Ingentis is building, the ability to model what-if scenarios and trace the ripple effects of specific succession moves through the rest of the structure, is the type of capability that turns succession planning from that list question to that risk question. The third thing I want to talk about is workforce planning and org design converging, which is something Timo specifically described. He offered a useful definitional frame, which is that workforce planning tells you what capabilities and capacity you need, while org design tells you how those capabilities should be structured to create performance. His argument was that the future is neither discipline in isolation, so not just workforce planning or just org design, but rather it's the integration of the two. For years, workforce planning and org design have lived in different parts of HR with different owners, tools, cycles, etc. And organizations are now, though, starting to ask these structural questions alongside headcount questions. So things like, what operational model do we need? We're doing a study on that right now with regard to HR. Which capabilities should be centralized? Which should be decentralized? Which management structures can support growth, etc. These are much more nuanced and difficult questions than just how many people do we need with these skills. And they require the type of data integration and scenario modeling and really overlap between workforce planning and org design that Timo described. Next, I wanted to address what Timo said about AI. And I want to be pretty precise here in terms of how he framed it. He said, AI will not replace leadership judgment, but it helps leaders make that judgment based on informed decisions. This is a good way to think about how AI can create value in the organization. The risk is not that AI makes a bad call, is that leaders who are using AI outputs don't understand the data foundation beneath them or have visibility into the second order effects of a decision. So if they don't understand the data foundation, they don't understand the limits of the recommendations. And if they don't understand the second order effects, that's because they may not have had a chance or the data to think critically about what's going to happen after this decision. So Timo's emphasis on getting the data foundation right before turning on these AI capabilities is one of the things that is really critical here, because at least in the first version, you've got a better start on getting the right types of recommendations out of your system. So pulling all this together, what I think Timo was describing and what Ingentis is building toward is org design as a continuous decision system rather than a periodic organizational exercise. When you combine that continuous org design and more continuous workforce planning, you have a really potent opportunity in front of you to understand and really give strategic intelligence to the organization about what is happening and how you need to adjust in real time. We're going to be doing a study later this year on workforce planning and its connection to org design. And so hopefully we'll be able to give you a lot more guidance on this particular topic. But if you want to go deeper on topics like data architecture, workforce planning, skills infrastructure, etc., that's exactly the kind of research we do here at Red Thread. If you join our membership, you can get access to all of it, and you'll get a lot more information as well from the peers who are on our membership platform. If you found this conversation useful, please go ahead and share it with a colleague. And if you're on a platform that allows it, a like or a comment goes a long way in helping more people find our show. With that, I'm going to say thank you so much for listening to this episode of 600 Seconds in HR Tech. I'm Stacia Garr, and I look forward to talking to you next time.